The morning of March 14th, 1944, Kapitänleutnant Heinrich Müller stood in the conning tower of U-554, watching the grey waters of the North Atlantic roll past his pressure hull. The U-boat was running submerged at periscope depth, 60 feet below the surface. Diesel engines silent, electric motors pushing them through the water at 4 knots. Above them, somewhere in the fog and spray, a British convoy was passing. 40 merchant ships, maybe more. Targets. Müller had been hunting convoys for 18 months, 23 patrols, 11 confirmed kills. He knew the rhythm of the hunt, the patient stalking, the careful manoeuvring into attack position. But something had changed in the past 2 months. Something the Kriegsmarine briefings didn't explain and the intelligence officers couldn't identify. U-boats were disappearing. Not in the violent, explosive way they died when torpedoes found them or depth charges crushed their hulls. They were simply vanishing. One moment, a boat would report contact with an escort vessel. The next moment, silence. No distress calls, no wreckage. Just gone. U. 554's hydrophone operator, Oberleutnant Werner Hoffmann, pressed his headphones tighter against his ears. He'd been listening to the convoy's propeller noise for 20 minutes, counting screws, identifying ship types, 40 merchant vessels, 8 escorts, standard convoy configuration. But Hoffmann was listening for something else, a specific sound, a sound that other U-boat operators had described in their final transmissions before going silent. A sound like rain hitting water, but metallic, sharp, staccato. The British called it Hedgehog. The German submariners had begun calling it Totenbringer, Deathbringer. Nobody knew exactly what it was. British intelligence had mentioned a new forward-throwing anti-submarine weapon in late 1942, but the initial reports were dismissive. Success rates of 5%. Better than conventional depth charges. Most U-boat commanders ignored it. If the weapon fired ahead of the attacking ship, they reasoned, standard evasive maneuvers would work. Go deep, change course, wait for the depth charges to stop exploding, surface when the escorts moved on, except the escorts weren't moving on anymore, and the depth charges weren't exploding. U-boats that encountered this new weapon simply stopped transmitting. By March 1944, 18 boats had vanished in the North Atlantic, in circumstances that suggested hedgehog attacks. 18 crews, nearly 900 men, all gone without explanation. Müller didn't believe in ghosts, he believed in physics, steel, water pressure, explosive force. Whatever this weapon was, it followed the same laws of nature as everything else. It could be understood, it could be defeated. He just needed to see it first. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The problem wasn't just the weapon. It was the silence. Depth charges were loud, deafening. When a destroyer dropped a pattern of depth charges, every man on the U-boat heard them exploding. The hull rang like a bell. Lights flickered. Gauges jumped. Even if the charges missed by 100 meters, the pressure waves shook the boat hard enough to terrify the crew. But that noise was information. It told you where the charges were landing, if they were getting closer or farther away, whether you needed to go deeper or change course. The explosions gave you data to work with. Hedgehog didn't explode unless it hit something. If the attack missed, there was just silence. No booming concussions, no pressure waves. Just the quiet hum of your electric motors and the sound of your own breathing. That silence was worse than the explosions, because it meant the escort ship above you still had sonar contact. It meant they were reloading, repositioning, preparing another attack. And you had no way to know if the next salvo would land on your hull or miss by meters. The hydrophone operator's voice cut through Müller's thoughts. Contact bearing 030. Range approximately 800 meters. Propeller count, twin screws, destroyer class. Through the murk and spray, he could see a shape. HMS Starling, British corvette. flower class. He recognized the silhouette. Starling had been hunting this convoy route for weeks. She'd sunk U-624 in February, U-709 2 weeks ago. Both times, survivors reported the same thing. No warning, no depth charge pattern. Just a sound like metal rain hitting the water, then nothing. Müller made his decision. Take us down. 150 meters, silent running. The diving officer acknowledged. The boat angled downward, planes adjusted, ballast flooded. The deck tilted beneath their feet. 100 meters. 120. 150. They levelled off in the black water, suspended in the Atlantic's cold darkness. Müller ordered all non-essential systems shut down. The crew moved in slow motion, conserving oxygen, making no noise. This was the drill. Go deep. Go silent. Wait for the escort to lose contact and move on. Except Starling didn't lose contact. Through the hull, Müller could hear the destroyer's ASDIC pinging. Active sonar. The British were holding them. The pings came in steady intervals, each one a hammer blow against the pressure hull. Ping. Pause. Ping. Pause. Starling knew exactly where they were. Then Hoffmann's voice, tight with fear. Herr Kapitän. I'm hearing something. Multiple splashes. Forward of our position. Range. Maybe 200 meters. Müller felt his stomach clench. This was it. The sound other commanders had described. The sound that came before the silence. How many splashes? I count 24, Herr Kapitän, all hitting the water within 3 seconds of each other. 24 projectiles. Müller did the math instantly. If they were spaced 15 feet apart, that created a circular pattern about 40 meters in diameter. His boat was 76 meters long. If that pattern landed anywhere near them, they were inside the kill zone. The projectiles were sinking fast. Hoffmann reported hearing them descending. Müller ordered a course change, hard to starboard, full ahead on electric motors. The boat responded sluggishly at depth. Turning radius at 150 meters was over 100 meters. They needed 30 seconds to complete the turn. The projectiles would reach them in under 10 seconds. The hydrophone operator counted down. Projectiles passing through 100 meters. 120. 140. They were sinking at 23 feet per second, faster than any depth charge. No time to evade, no time to surface. No time to do anything but wait and hope the pattern missed. 150 meters. Hoffmann's voice went silent. The entire crew held their breath. Müller gripped the periscope housing, knuckles white, waiting for the impact. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Nothing. The projectiles had missed. They'd passed through the U-boat's depth and continued sinking toward the ocean floor without detonating. Müller felt his heartbeat slow. They'd survived. The crew began to breathe again. Some men made the sign of the cross. Others simply stared at the deck plates, processing what had just happened. But Starling hadn't finished. The ASDIC pings continued. The British still had contact, and Müller knew what came next. Another pattern. Another 24 projectiles. The escorts could reload in 3 minutes. All they had to do was maintain sonar contact and fire again, and again, and again, until one pattern landed on top of them. The problem for U-boat commanders was simple. You couldn't dodge what you couldn't hear exploding. Depth charges gave. Warning. Their explosions told you if the attack was getting closer. With Hedgehog, there was no warning. Just the sound of projectiles entering the water, then silence. Either they missed and you lived, or they hit and you died. There was no middle ground. No near misses that scared the crew but left the boat intact. 1 or 2 direct hits were sufficient to punch through the pressure hull, and once the hull was breached at depth, there was no escape. Müller ordered another course change, this time to port, full speed, zigzag pattern. It was the only tactic he had. Keep moving. Make yourself a harder target. Hope the British couldn't predict your maneuvers. But that required battery power, lots of it. And U-554's batteries were already at 60%. Running full speed at depth drained them at 4% per hour. They had maybe 12 hours of power left before they'd need to surface and recharge. Starling could hunt them for days. The second pattern hit the water. 8 minutes later, another 24 projectiles. Hoffmann counted them. Again, they descended at terrifying speed. Again, Müller ordered evasive maneuvers. This time the pattern landed closer, maybe 50 meters off the starboard beam, but 50 meters was still a miss. The projectiles continued to the bottom without detonating. The crew's relief was palpable. 2 attacks survived, but how many more would come? What Müller didn't understand was the mathematics of the weapon. Each Hedgehog bomb was 7 inches in diameter, 65 pounds, carrying 35 pounds of Torpex explosive. Torpex was 40% more powerful than TNT. A single hit on the pressure hull would create a hole 3 to 4 inches wide. At 150 meters depth, water pressure was over 200 pounds per square inch. That hole would flood the boat with 400 gallons per minute, enough to raise the internal atmospheric pressure and temperature to lethal levels within minutes. Enough to send the boat sinking beyond crush depth before anyone could react. But Müller didn't know any of this. The Kriegsmarine intelligence briefings had been vague. The weapon was described as experimental, unproven, ineffective. Success rates were low. U-boats had survived encounters with it. That's what the reports said. What the reports didn't say was that those early encounters had occurred in late 1942 and early 1943, when British crews were still learning to use the weapon, when confidence was low and training was inadequate, when success rates were barely 5%. By March 1944, everything had changed. British crews had been trained properly, confidence had been restored. Sonar operators had learned to maintain contact during Hedgehog attacks. Fire control systems had been integrated with ASDIC targeting. The weapon that had been a failure in 1942 had become the most effective anti-submarine weapon in the Atlantic by 1944. And the success rate had climbed from 5% to nearly 20%. 1 in every 5 Hedgehog attacks now resulted in a kill. For U-boat crews, those were terrible odds. A single convoy crossing might involve 3 or 4 Hedgehog attacks. 20% chance per attack meant a crew had maybe a 50-50 chance of surviving a single convoy encounter. Over multiple patrols, the odds became statistical certainty. Eventually, the weapon would get you. It was just a matter of time. Starling fired a third pattern at 09:45 hours. This one landed even closer. Hoffmann reported splashes 20 meters off the port bow, close enough that Müller could hear them hitting the water through the hull. The projectiles descended like falling hammers. Müller braced for impact, but again, the pattern missed. The bombs sank past them without detonating. 3 attacks survived. Müller's crew was exhausted. Fear did that. It drained men faster than physical labor. Some of them were shaking. Others had stopped reacting at all, sitting at their stations with blank faces, waiting for death. The 4th attack came at 10:15, another 24 projectiles. This time, Starling had adjusted her aim. The pattern landed directly overhead. Hoffmann's voice was barely a whisper. Projectiles descending, Herr Kaleon, directly above us. Müller didn't order evasive maneuvers. There was no time. The projectiles would reach them in 8 seconds. At that range, any turn would take too long. All he could do was stand in the conning tower and wait. The first projectile hit the aft deck at 10:16 and 32 seconds. The explosion was muffled, distant, like a hammer striking the hull from outside. Then nothing. No secondary detonations. No sympathetic explosions from nearby projectiles. Just that single, terrible thump. Then silence. For 3 seconds, Müller thought they'd survived. 1 hit, but no breach. The pressure hull had held. Then the lights went out. and the water started coming in. The emergency lighting flickered on 3 seconds after the main power died. Red bulbs cast the control room in crimson shadow. The flooding alarm screamed. Müller could hear it before anyone reported it. Water rushing into the aft compartment. Not a trickle, not a leak, a torrent. 400 gallons per minute pouring through a hole the size of a man's fist. The damage control officer's voice was steady despite the terror in his eyes. Breach in the aft battery compartment, Herr Kapitän. 3-inch hole in the pressure hull. We're attempting to seal it. Müller knew immediately that sealing was impossible. At 150 meters, the water pressure was too great. Any patch would be blown off the moment they applied it. The only option was to surface, and hope Starling didn't shell them before they could abandon ship. Emergency blow. All ballast tanks. Surface. The diving officer pulled the emergency. Blow levers. Compressed air screamed into the ballast tanks, forcing water out through the vents. The boat began to rise. But slowly. Too slowly. The flooding in the aft compartment was adding weight faster than the compressed air could expel ballast water. They were rising at 10 meters per minute. It would take 15 minutes to reach the surface. They didn't have 15 minutes. The temperature in the aft compartment was already climbing. Water pouring in at 200 pounds per square inch compressed the air inside the sealed space. Compressed air heats up. Physics. Within 2 minutes, the temperature in that compartment reached 150 degrees Celsius. Any man still alive in there was being cooked, their lungs seared by superheated air, their skin blistering. Müller could hear them screaming over the intercom before the circuit went dead. U-554 broke surface at 10:23, 11 minutes after the Hedgehog hit. The conning tower hatch burst. Open, and Müller climbed out into cold Atlantic air. Starling was waiting. She'd maintained sonar contact throughout the ascent and positioned herself 800 meters off the starboard beam. Her deck gun was already trained on the U-boat. Müller gave the only order he could. Abandon ship. All hands. The crew evacuated in controlled panic. Men poured out of the forward hatch and the conning tower, grabbing life vests, inflating the rubber raft. The aft hatch never opened. The men in that compartment were already dead. Müller counted heads. 47 men made it out. 8 didn't. The boat was settling fast, stern first, flooding, pulling it down. Starling didn't fire. Instead, she manoeuvred closer and began pulling survivors from the water. Standard procedure by March 1944. The British wanted prisoners, wanted intelligence, wanted to know what the Germans knew about the convoy routes and patrol patterns. Müller found himself on Starling's deck 20 minutes later, wrapped in a blanket, watching his boat disappear beneath the waves. U-554 went down stern first at 10:57, carrying 8 dead crewmen and all the secrets of her final patrol. In the destroyer's wardroom, a British intelligence officer questioned Müller through an interpreter. The officer wanted to know about German tactics, about radio procedures, about Wolfpack coordination. Müller answered some questions, deflected others, gave the minimum required by the Geneva Convention. But eventually, the officer asked the question Müller had been dreading. How many Hedgehog attacks did you survive before we got you? Müller met his eyes. 4. The officer nodded, wrote something in his notebook. You lasted longer than most. Average is 2 patterns, sometimes 3. But nobody survives 4. He said it matter-of-factly, like he was discussing the weather. Your tactics were good, going deep, changing course. But the weapon doesn't care about your tactics. It only cares about geometry. 24 projectiles in a pattern 40 meters wide. Your boat is 76 meters long. If any part of that pattern overlaps with any part of your hull, you die. Simple mathematics. Müller said nothing. What could he say? The man was right. It was mathematics. Probability. Statistics. And the statistics were clear. The more Hedgehog attacks you survived, the higher the chance that the next one would kill you. It wasn't about skill or courage or experience. It was about rolling dice over and over until you lost. The intelligence officer leaned forward. "We're sinking a U-boat every 3 days now, most of them to Hedgehog. Your headquarters knows this. They're not telling your crews because they don't want panic. But you should know, you're going to a prisoner camp in Canada. You'll survive the war. Most of your comrades won't." What the British officer didn't tell Müller was the larger picture. The statistical nightmare that was unfolding across the entire Atlantic. Between March 1st and May 31st, 1944, Allied escorts equipped with Hedgehog would sink 24 U-boats in 90 days. 24 boats, nearly 1,200 men, one U-boat sinking every 3.7 days. The rate was accelerating. In March, 6 U-boats were sunk by Hedgehog. In April, 9. In May, another 9. The weapon that had been dismissed as ineffective in 1942 had become the primary submarine killer of 1944. The mathematics were brutal. British records showed that during the entire war, depth charges achieved a kill ratio of 60-1. For every 60 depth charge attacks, one U-boat was destroyed. Hedgehog achieved a ratio of 5.7-1. For every 6 Hedgehog attacks, one U-boat was killed. The improvement was more than tenfold, and as crews gained experience, the ratio improved further. By mid-1944, the US Navy was reporting an 8% kill rate per Hedgehog pattern. By mid-1945, that would climb to 10%. 1 in 10 attacks resulted in a kill. For U-boat crews, the implications were terrifying. A single Atlantic patrol might involve 5 or 6 encounters with escort vessels. If each encounter involved 2 or 3 Hedgehog attacks, the cumulative probability of death became almost certain. The mathematics were inescapable. Patrol after patrol, attack after attack, the odds ground down even the most experienced crews. Survival became a matter of luck, not skill. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Kapitänleutnant Wolfgang Lüth commanded U-181. He was one of Germany's most decorated submarine commanders. Second highest scoring ace in the Kriegsmarine. 46 confirmed sinkings. Knight's Cross, with oak leaves and diamonds. He'd survived 4 years of war, dozens of depth charge attacks, multiple convoy battles. But in April 1944, Luth encountered Hedgehog for the first time and barely escaped. His patrol report, recovered after the war, described the experience in clinical detail. April 7th, 1944. Submerged at periscope depth, stalking convoy HX-285, detected by escort vessel, identified as destroyer class, dove to 200 meters. Heard multiple splashes forward of our position, counted 24 projectiles entering water. No explosions. Projectiles sank past our depth without detonating. Maintained course, assuming depth charges were set incorrectly. Second attack came 3 minutes later. Pattern landed closer. Still no explosions. Third attack landed directly overhead. One projectile struck forward deck but failed to detonate. Damage to outer hull plating only. Pressure hull intact. Surfaced after escort departed. Inspected damage. Found impact crater on deck. No penetration. Hedgehog projectile that hit his boat struck at a shallow angle and failed to penetrate the pressure hull. Contact fuses were designed to detonate on hard impact, but occasionally they malfunctioned. Projectiles that struck at glancing angles sometimes bounced off rather than detonating. But Luth understood what he'd survived. His report continued. This weapon is fundamentally different from depth charges. No warning of attack. No explosions unless direct hit achieved. Crew morale severely affected. They understand that depth charges can be evaded. This weapon cannot. If the pattern lands on you, you die. If it misses, you live. There is no skill involved, only chance. Luth's assessment circulated through the U-boat command structure. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, read it personally. Dönitz had been dismissing Hedgehog reports for months, believing they were exaggerations or misidentifications of conventional weapons. But Luth was not a man given exaggeration. If Luth said the weapon was deadly, it was deadly. Dönitz ordered intelligence officers to compile all available information on Hedgehog. The results were fragmentary. Prisoner interrogations provided some details. Survivors described the weapon's appearance, the pattern of projectiles, the lack of explosions on misses. But nobody could explain why it was suddenly so effective. The weapon had existed since late 1942. Why was it only now becoming a major threat? The answer lay in training and doctrine. When Hedgehog first entered service in November 1942, British crews didn't trust it. The weapon was new, unfamiliar, complicated to operate. Crews preferred depth charges because they were familiar and because the explosions gave psychological reassurance. Even when depth charges missed, the booming detonations felt like you were doing something. Hedgehog's silence when it missed felt like failure. A directive had been issued in early 1943 ordering commanders to report why they hadn't used Hedgehog on submarine contacts. The results revealed widespread reluctance. Crews complained about mechanical failures, about the weapon's limited range, about the difficulty of maintaining sonar contact during attacks. But the real issue was confidence. Crews didn't believe Hedgehog would work, so they didn't use it aggressively. That changed after an officer from the Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development visited the escort base at Londonderry in late 1943. He brought examples of successful Hedgehog attacks, gun camera footage, sonar recordings, prisoner testimony. He conducted ship-wide briefings explaining the weapon's advantages: no blind spot, no lost sonar contact, faster sink rate than depth charges, contact fuzzes that guaranteed kills on hits. The briefings worked. Crews began using Hedgehog regularly, and as they gained experience, their accuracy improved. By January 1944, Hedgehog was the primary anti-submarine weapon on British escorts. By March, the kill rate had climbed to 15%. By May, it was approaching 20%. The weapon hadn't changed. The crews had. Training, confidence, and integration with improved sonar systems had transformed Hedgehog from an experimental curiosity into the most lethal submarine killer in the Atlantic. German intelligence officers couldn't figure this out from prisoner interrogations. All they knew was that U-boats were dying at unprecedented rates. In March 1944 alone, the Kriegsmarine lost 15 U-boats in the Atlantic, 6 to Hedgehog, 3 to aircraft, 4 to depth charges, 2 to unknown causes. In April, losses climbed to 21 boats, 9 to Hedgehog, 5 to aircraft, 7 to other causes. The U-boat fleet was hemorrhaging crews faster than training schools could replace them. The psychological effect on U-boat crews was catastrophic. Men who had survived multiple patrols began refusing to go to sea. Some claimed illness, others fabricated mechanical problems with their boats. A few deserted outright. The Kriegsmarine responded with courts-martial and executions, but that only made morale worse. By May 1944, it took threats of execution to get some crews aboard their boats. Oberleutnant Hans Schmidt commanded U-214. On his fourth patrol, in late April 1944, he encountered Hedgehog 3 times in a single day. The first attack missed. The second landed close enough that Schmidt could hear projectiles striking the seabed near his boat. The third attack hit. One projectile penetrated the forward torpedo room, flooding the compartment and killing 6 men instantly. Schmidt surfaced and surrendered. His crew was rescued by HMS Loch Killen. In his interrogation, Schmidt was asked how he felt knowing he'd survived when his crewmates had died. Schmidt's response was recorded verbatim. "I felt nothing. Relief, perhaps, but mostly nothing. We knew the weapon would get us eventually. It was only a question of when. Every time we heard those projectiles hit the water, every man aboard was calculating probabilities. 24 bombs, 40-meter pattern, 76-meter boat. If you're inside the pattern, 1 or 2 hits will kill you. We survived 2 attacks by luck. The third attack. Luck ran out. Mathematics doesn't care about skill or courage. It only cares about numbers. The interrogator pressed him. Did you try to evade? Schmidt laughed bitterly. Of course we tried. Everyone tries. Go deep. Change course. Zigzag. It doesn't matter. The weapon descends at 7 meters per second. From the surface to 200 meters depth takes 28 seconds. In that time, we can turn maybe 30 degrees and move 50 meters. The projectiles land in a 40-meter circle. If we're anywhere near that circle when they land, we die. You can't evade something that fast. You can only hope it misses. By May 1944. German naval headquarters was receiving reports that described Hedgehog not as a weapon, but as a lottery of death. U-boat commanders spoke about it in almost superstitious terms. The weapon that strikes without warning. The silent killer. Der Totenbringer. The intelligence analysts tried to remain clinical. They compiled statistics, analyzed attack patterns, issued tactical recommendations. Go deeper than 400 meters if possible. Maintain speed to reduce time in the kill zone. Surface immediately if hit to minimize flooding. But everyone knew the recommendations were meaningless. You couldn't outrun mathematics. The final blow came in late May. U-549, a Type IXC boat commanded by Kapitänleutnant Krankenhagen, departed Lorient on May 14th for a patrol in the South Atlantic. The boat was equipped with a schnorchel, the new breathing apparatus that allowed submarines to run diesel engines while submerged. The schnorchel was supposed to make U-boats nearly invisible to radar and sonar. It was the latest German countermeasure, the technology that was supposed to turn the tide back in favor of the U-boats. On May 29th, U-549 encountered Task Group 21.11 off the Cape Verde Islands. The group consisted of the escort carrier USS Block Island and 4 destroyer escorts, including USS Eugene E. Elmore. Krankenhagen maneuvered into attack position and torpedoed Block Island, sinking her. It was supposed to be a triumphant moment, proof that U-boats could still strike effectively. Instead, it became a death sentence. Elmore hunted U-549 for the next 3 hours. The destroyer escort was equipped with Type 144 sonar, the most advanced system in the US Navy. Range 2,500 yards in normal conditions, 3,000 in ideal conditions. Elmore's sonar operator locked onto U-549 at 1,800 yards and never lost contact. Krankenhagen tried everything. Went deep to 600 feet, changed course repeatedly, ran silent. Nothing worked. The Type 144 sonar held them. At 14:30 hours, Elmore fired her first Hedgehog pattern. The projectiles missed. Krankenhagen tried to turn away, but Elmore maintained contact and reloaded. 3 minutes later, the second pattern entered the water. This time, sonar operators on Elmore heard 3 distinct underwater explosions 30 seconds after launch. 3 projectiles had struck U-549. The submarine imploded 4 minutes later at crush depth, killing all 59 crewmen aboard. Elmore's attack report described the engagement in technical language. Contact maintained throughout attack sequence. First pattern failed to achieve hits. Second pattern resulted in 3 confirmed detonations at target depth. Heavy crushing sound heard 4 minutes after detonation, consistent with pressure hull failure at depth. Contact lost. Target assessed as destroyed. The report was filed, analysed, and added to the growing pile of evidence that Hedgehog was ending the U-boat threat. By the end of May 1944, the statistics were undeniable. In 3 months, Hedgehog had sunk 24 U-boats, more than aircraft, more than depth charges, more than any other single weapon system. The average depth charge attack required 60 attempts to achieve 1 kill. The average Hedgehog attack required fewer than 6. The weapon had transformed the Battle of the Atlantic from a brutal stalemate into a systematic execution of the U-boat fleet. German naval headquarters tried to respond. They issued new tactical directives: avoid convoy routes where Hedgehog-equipped escorts were known to operate. Surface immediately if detected to deny the weapon its underwater advantage. Maintain depth below 400 meters to reduce effectiveness. But the directives were meaningless. By mid-1944, most Allied escorts carried Hedgehog. Surfacing meant facing deck guns and aircraft. Going below 400 meters meant operating near crush depth with minimal reserve for evasion. The truth was that there was no effective countermeasure to Hedgehog. The weapon exploited the fundamental vulnerability of submarines, their need to operate underwater, where detection meant death. Once an escort achieved sonar contact and maintained it during the attack run, the U-boat had no options. It couldn't outrun the projectiles. It couldn't dodge them. It could only hope the pattern missed. And hope was not a tactic. By June 1944, U-boat losses had reached the point where Admiral Dönitz considered withdrawing all boats from the Atlantic. The loss rate had climbed to 75%. 3 out of every 4 U-boats that departed on patrol never returned. Those odds were unsustainable. Crews were being sent to their deaths with no reasonable expectation of success. The U-boat campaign, which had nearly strangled Britain in 1942, had become a suicide mission by 1944. Dönitz kept the boats at sea only because Hitler ordered it. The Führer insisted that U-boats, even if they sank no ships, tied down Allied resources. Every escort hunting U-boats was an escort not supporting the invasion of Europe. It was a strategic argument, but it ignored the human cost. Every U-boat sent to sea was 40 to 50 men sent to die for no tactical gain. The crews knew it. The commanders knew it. Even Dönitz knew it. But the orders stood. In July 1944, U-233 departed Bergen, Norway, for a patrol in the North Atlantic. The boat was commanded by Kapitänleutnant Hans-Joachim Bertlesman, an experienced officer with 3 previous patrols. The crew was mostly veterans. They knew what they were facing. Before departure, Bertlesman addressed his men in the mess deck. His words were recorded by a crew member who survived the war in a prisoner camp. "Gentlemen, we know the situation. The Atlantic is no longer our ocean. The enemy has weapons we cannot defeat. They have aircraft that see through darkness. They have sonar that tracks us at depths we once thought safe. And they have Hedgehog. I will not lie to you. If we encounter Hedgehog, our chances of survival are poor. 1 in 5 attacks results in a kill. If we face multiple attacks, the odds compound against us. Mathematics is not on our side." He paused. Let the words sink in, then continued. "But we are still U-boat men. We still have our training, our discipline, our courage. We will execute our mission professionally. We will hunt enemy shipping. And if we encounter Hedgehog, we will do everything possible to survive. That is all we can do. That is all any of us can do." 233 was sunk by Hedgehog on July 26, 1944, by the British frigate HMS Curzon. All hands lost. Bertlesman's speech became legend among surviving U-boat crews after the war, not because it offered hope, but because it acknowledged the truth. They were fighting a weapon they couldn't defeat. The only question was whether they would be among the 20% who died or the 80% who survived each attack. The war ended in May 1945. By then, Hedgehog had sunk 47 U-boats confirmed, with another dozen probable. The weapon had achieved what depth charges never could: systematic destruction of submarines through precision rather than brute force. The statistics told the story. 5,174 depth charge attacks for 85 kills, 268 Hedgehog attacks for 47 kills. One weapon required 60 attacks per kill. The other required fewer than 6. In 1946, Allied naval officers met with surviving U-boat commanders at interrogation centres across Europe. They wanted to understand the German perspective, to learn what had worked and what hadn't. One question appeared repeatedly in the transcripts. What was the most effective Allied anti-submarine weapon? The answers were unanimous. Not aircraft, though aircraft killed many boats. Not depth charges, though they terrified crews. Hedgehog. Every surviving commander cited Hedgehog as the weapon they feared most, not because it was the most powerful, but because it was the most certain. One hit, or two, was usually fatal, and there was no way to know if an attack had missed until it was over. The silence was worse than explosions, because silence meant uncertainty, and uncertainty meant fear. Kapitänleutnant Heinrich Müller, who survived U-554's sinking and spent the rest of the war in a Canadian prisoner camp, was interviewed in 1947 by U.S. Navy historians. They asked him what made Hedgehog so effective. Müller's answer was recorded verbatim. The weapon removed skill from the equation. A depth charge attack was a duel between the escort commander and the U-boat captain. Both men used tactics, experience, intuition. The better tactician usually won, but Hedgehog was not a duel. It was an execution. The escort maintained sonar contact. They fired the weapon. It either hit or it missed. We had no influence over the outcome. That was psychologically devastating. We were trained to believe that skill and courage mattered. Hedgehog proved they didn't. Only luck mattered. And luck always runs out eventually. He paused, remembering the morning his luck ran out. Then continued, I survived because I was fortunate. 47 of my crew survived. 8 did not. Those 8 men died because mathematics said they would, not because they were less skilled or less brave, just because the pattern landed on them. In war, we accept that brave men die, but we want to believe their deaths have meaning, that they died fighting, using their skills to the end. Hedgehog denied us even that. It reduced brave men to statistics. That was the cruelty of it. Not the weapon itself, but what it represented. The industrialization of death, the removal of the human element. We were not warriors anymore, just targets in a probability calculation. The British officer who designed Hedgehog, Commander Charles Goodeve of the Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, was asked after the war if he felt any remorse for creating such an effective killing machine. His response was clinical. War is mathematics. The side that applies mathematics most effectively wins. Hedgehog was simply the logical application of probability theory to submarine warfare. 24 projectiles in a pattern large enough to overlap a submarine's hull, high sink rate to minimize evasion time, contact fuses to guarantee kills on hits. It wasn't cruel. It was efficient. Efficient. That was the word that captured the essence of Hedgehog. The weapon was efficient. It killed submarines efficiently. It used minimal explosives efficiently. It allowed escorts to maintain sonar contact efficiently. Efficiency won wars, but efficiency also meant that 1,200 German submariners died not in heroic battles, but in mathematical certainty. They died because a pattern of bombs happened to land on them rather than beside them. They died because probability said they would. Decades after the war, historians would debate Hedgehog's role in ending the U-boat threat. Some argued aircraft were more important. Others credited improved radar and sonar. But the submariners themselves, the men who survived, they had no doubt. Hedgehog broke the U-boat fleet not by killing the most boats, but by destroying crew morale. It made every patrol a lottery with death. And men can fight enemies. They can fight weapons. But they cannot fight mathematics. Mathematics always wins. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.